Okay, so hi Mark, and our first question is, how did you come up with this idea or project?
When I was at the University of Minnesota for my PhD, I was lucky enough to work with David and Roger Johnson, two gentlemen that have done research on small group instruction for probably 40 or 50 years. And they have a really intricate, well-structured approach to doing it. And so when I graduated, I obtained a grant to extend their work, and I hired them to come out and train teachers, middle school, middle level teachers for me. And then I supported the teachers and observed them in the classroom for the next 2 years. And I realized that the Johnson's structure is very intricate, and they have a lot of great findings regarding the ability of their approach to create gains in achievement and in peer relations. But it's a very complex approach, and the teachers that I worked with had some difficulties in implementing it with fidelity. There's a lot going on in a traditional implementation. There's a lot for the teacher to do. There's a lot of transitions between groups. Sometimes there are students with different materials that have to be in the right place. Everyone needs to know what they're doing at every moment so the lesson can finish on time. And that's not always the case in a traditional implementation. So sometimes teachers would leave things out, or they would run out of time and the lesson wouldn't finish. And so it became clear to me that in order to do this in a scalable way, in order to give teachers the opportunity to implement this without having to practice and struggle with it for 6 months or a year or multiple years, we needed to create some technology to help teachers manage the logistics of the lesson. And so I wrote a grant application, and I've spent the last 3 years working on the technology so that everyone in the classroom, the students and the teacher, they know exactly what's going on in every moment. The students have their interface, so they know who they're working with, and they have their materials, and they know what their task list is, and they know how much time they have, and they know what the next step in the lesson is. And the teacher is aware of the status of all the groups at once and can monitor the students' work. And basically the teacher then is freed up to not worry about a lot of these logistics and simply move around the room and help students that need help and help groups that need help. And a lot of the burden then is removed from the teacher, and they don't necessarily have to pay attention to all the logistical issues, but they can implement this wonderful approach with fidelity very, very quickly and easily.
Okay, sounds very interesting and a nice way to start a very big project. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we have another question for you, and how is peer learning different from more informal group work and small group work?
I've spent a lot of time observing teachers over the last 5 years or so, and I've seen a lot of different approaches to small group work, and a lot of times it is very informal. Sometimes teachers will say, go find your friend and go complete this task together. Very easy to implement. However, there's significant risk for negative outcomes in that kind of loosely structured situation. Students that are working together who are already friends, for example, may socialize rather than doing the work. Students who don't have any friends in the classroom may struggle to find people to work with, which is very stressful experience. It may be that there is disagreement within the group about who's doing what piece of the task. Or there may be students that are not contributing, that are simply wasting time, and the other students in the group have to do all the work. So when you have an unstructured approach like that, there is a risk for negative outcomes academically and socially. Students may not be learning, they may have disagreements with one another that may contribute to all kinds of stress and negative interactions down the road. What the Johnson's approach does is it gives each student in every group an important role that they can fulfill to contribute to the success of the group. The Johnson's approach also incentivizes every student and helps them to realize that they can gain personally from the success of other students in the group. And so they are motivated to assist the other students in the group to make sure that the group succeeds. And that changes the social dynamic a lot. Everyone is clear on what they need to be doing and how they can contribute. And there's a lot of peer expectations that each person will fulfill their role in the group so the group can be successful. So there's a much greater likelihood of positive outcomes academically and socially.
Okay, I think this is worth also for Italy, because we have similar situation, and this really helps teachers to structure their work.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so we mentioned teachers, but our next question is related to students. What can peer learning do for students?
Small group instruction is a very active form of learning. The students are empowered to play an active role in their learning. Oftentimes they're tasked with learning something and teaching it to their peers or working together to complete something. So it's very active on the student perspective, much more so than sitting and listening to something being explained to them. So it often results in a deeper form of learning, longer retention. Teachers will find that they won't have to go back and repeat things because students will have figured it out and understood it from the beginning. And so there's a lot of research on positive academic effects. The process of working together with other students, especially students that you don't know, also has positive social effects, whereby students can begin to know one another's names and to get familiar with one another, get comfortable with one another, get to know one another, and that contributes to positive social outcomes as well, whereby students feel they have friends at school, they feel like they belong at school, that there are people at school that care about them. And that does a lot of things for students' mental health. It reduces a lot of social stress, social pressure. It makes students feel more comfortable. We find results of lower rates of mental health problems, lower rates of behavioral problems, because the school environment feels more welcoming. We especially find these effects for students who traditionally would struggle in school. Students with disabilities, students of color, students who are left out of the traditional social groups. These students often find school to be extremely stressful because they don't have mechanisms of support there. They don't have social support from their peers. And so when we can help these students to build social skills while they're learning in small groups and to start to establish relationships with their peers, we find that a lot of that stress is relieved. And so a lot of the disparities that you would normally find in among students who are with disabilities, for example, students of color, a lot of those disparities disappear when you implement small group instruction. Mm-hmm. So again, it's especially good for the students that need the most help, which is why it's such a powerful technique.
Okay, so it does help students both academically and in terms of social-emotional well-being, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes, and again, especially for the students that need the most help. They're the ones that benefit the most from this. Everyone benefits, but the effects are larger for students that would traditionally struggle. And so we see that the gap between these students and other students is reduced or eliminated when we implement this kind of small group instruction.
This might be particularly important after the pandemic, right?
Exactly right. Yeah, the pandemic has had a disproportionate effect on the students that don't have a social network, don't have social skills, low socioeconomic status, struggle to learn for whatever reason. Those are the students that have been affected the most by the pandemic, and they're the ones that need the most help. And this small group instruction is a way to do that.
Okay. So going back to teachers and also to using this software, do you think that teachers find it difficult to learn and use this software?
Well, it's interesting. We actually have some research using software, and we find that teachers feel less stress and less burnout, and they feel more effective when using the software versus doing things the way they would traditionally do them. And I think part of that is due to the nature of small group instruction itself. It contrasts a lot to a traditional lecture, for example. A teacher standing in front of a classroom trying to engage 25 or 30 students at once, trying to explain something to them in a way that they understand. That's very stressful. That's a lot of work. And a lot of research would testify that it doesn't work all that well. It's difficult for students to pay attention for an extended period of time when they're simply sitting still. And it's difficult to remember things if you don't actually have an opportunity to apply them right away. And so what we find is that teachers feel a certain amount of stress trying to engage a class as a whole. Students are often shy and don't speak up and don't answer questions, and teachers find that very stressful, and especially if they're doing that all day long. And so when we changed the mode of instruction to small groups, the teacher isn't in the spotlight. They're not on the stage anymore. They're simply a support mechanism for the groups, making sure that the groups are working together effectively. So it's a much less stressful form of instruction for teachers. And as I was saying before too, when students are engaged, when they're active, when they're learning and explaining, asking one another questions, they're learning in a deeper way than they would be if they were simply sitting and listening. So there's less need to go back and review things and to recover things at a later date because students haven't understood. So that's some of the benefits from small group instruction. In terms of the technology, we find that teachers tend to adapt to the technology pretty quickly. We've worked hard to make it easy to use. We have a variety of different training mechanisms. They're in person, there's videos on the website, and teachers have the ability to simulate a lesson with a fake classroom before they actually go into a real classroom with real students, so they can get comfortable with the technology in advance. And so we find that if a teacher is willing to give it a chance to deliver 2 or 3 lessons, everyone will pick it up pretty quickly and adapt to it and become comfortable working in small groups.
Okay, so that's great. So it basically does help also teachers' well-being, and it's easy to use. So it really is a must.